course, it's the Salvation Army here in Schenectady that runs the city mission. They have free food in the mornings for the homeless. They run a thrift shop. You can get some clothing that's at a very reduced rate. Now, anytime the government raises taxes, obviously nonprofit organizations like this here are going to take a little bit of a hit because people can only give so much. The question really becomes, who better to serve the people? Is the government the best place to go for food, for clothing, for shelter? Or is perhaps a nonprofit organization like the Salvation Army?
In the almanac, and I see under U.S. Charities by donations, Salvation Army is one of the biggest charities in the world. And for years now, they've been getting well over $1 billion a year, which sounds like a lot of money, and they can do some great work with that. But of course, that pales in comparison to the federal budget, and even the deficit alone is in the trillions of dollars per year. So you would need 1,000 Salvation Armies to reach $1 trillion worth of work. Which brings me to the Social Security system. Every year I get this statement telling me how much I'm going to be worth when I get to retirement at 62 or at age 70, or my full retirement, which is 66 years and some odd. And I'll get somewhere around, what does it say here? $1,908 a month, it looks like, if I work till 66. And my wife, I was looking at hers for some reason, and I can't figure this out. Her number's higher than mine, which doesn't make sense to me at all, because I've earned more per year than she has for the last 20 years. So I don't get how that works exactly. You know, people sometimes think of Social Security as being kind of an investment because they're putting in 6% or their employer's putting matching funds, and they think of that growing, but there's really no money there growing. It's not an investment. In fact, most people call it a Ponzi scheme, named after Mr. Ponzi back in the 1920s. But it's really a transfer program, because through your working life, you give money to the government and you get nothing in return. Then when you retire, the government gives you something and you offered the government nothing in return. So there's no quid pro quo there. And of course, we're all trusting that when it comes our time to retire, that the money will be there, that there'll be somebody on the other end working, chipping into the system, so that we'll be able to benefit.
Mandates are providing for a very unfriendly and hostile business climate, and what it becomes a snowball effect where the businesses are discouraged, they don't grow, they leave, and the mandates continue, and they continue to grow, and then the taxes rise again, the business climate gets even worse. So this is how it's affecting us in Warren County. This is how I see it affecting us around upstate New York.
The analogy that I most like to use about unfunded mandates is going out to dinner. You go out to dinner with a couple of friends and you tell the waitress at the start, we're just going to split the bill 3 ways. So you and one of the friends order hamburgers and your third friend orders surf and turf. And then a great bottle of wine afterward. Laws made in this building right here say that you will pay for that portion of the state's bill that the state doesn't want to pay for. And so you've heard from many others today before me about the impact of this problem on county government. And it's something that I've been talking about for almost 11 years that I've been the county executive. State mandated spending is a huge burden to us in county government. Can we survive, and can our local services survive until the mandate relief that was included in this year's budget kicks in for us? And what happens if we can't? With the 2% property tax cap that's been mentioned, something that's very necessary in the state, not just for political reasons, but because local taxes in New York State are 80% higher than the national average. This year's Rensselaer County budget, 2% tax cap would allow us to raise $1.1 million in additional revenue. Unfortunately, the cost of the increase only, just the increase in state mandates, was $6.8 million. The difference is made up by spending cuts. And those spending cuts are for those local services that aren't mandated. That's whether or not we can deliver a lunch to our homebound seniors. That's whether or not we can take our veterans to their medical appointments. That's whether or not we can pave our roads and highways. And let me ask you this, how do we attract people to our county and say, come invest in our county when we can't even invest in it ourselves? That's the predicament we're facing. How do we turn our backs on our veterans who put their lives on the line for this country? How do we turn our backs on our frail seniors who have given so much to their communities? These are the choices that we have to face every year at budget. And it stinks. I gotta tell you, it stinks to have to make those choices. We've looked at reducing costs on our own wherever we can. We've renegotiated labor contracts to reduce our health insurance costs. We've replaced equipment to reduce our energy costs. We've combined departments. We've reduced staffing, including through some 48 layoffs in just the last year alone. We've brought in volunteers, and we've done countless other things to control the costs that we can. As a result of that, our local costs are 11% less than they were 5 years ago. Our state mandated costs are 54% higher than they were 5 years ago. The state needs to take a lesson. They need to look at what it is that we're doing in county government. They need to be frugal. They need to order hamburger instead of steak and shrimp.
The building over here, State Education Department, and they literally flow with unfunded mandates. Just this week, students across the state were taking 4th grade and 5th grade and 3rd grade ELA tests. Great tests. Nobody's going to argue that we shouldn't do those kind of things. But the way we process the tests, it's mandated by the state and it's funded by the local districts, and there's smarter ways to do it, but we don't have that local control to exercise that. The state offers about 30% of the funding for schools. About 30 years ago, they would have offered about 70% of the funding, so you can see that downhill trend. Yet, more than 70% of our budget is dictated by unfunded mandates. This is sort of like somebody walking up to you and giving you a $100 bill today and then telling you to buy one of those garbage cans for $250. It wouldn't sound like such a good deal, would it? So let me tell you about a few examples of unfunded mandates in public education today. And I recognize not a lot of you are in school governance, so I'm going to try and put this in maybe a business scenario for you. Suppose you're a business owner and you had to pay an additional 15% on every capital improvement because of something that the state mandated. And it was based on a special interest group you neither belonged to nor was in your area. Suppose you had to negotiate with your workforce, and if you couldn't come to an agreement, then your workers were guaranteed raises in perpetuity. That's what happens in education. Suppose you had workers with special needs, and you knew how to address those needs in a smart way, but you were mandated to do it a different way, so that cost became your fastest rising line item in your budget. And suppose you had better ways to purchase services and materials by partnering with other groups, but outdated legislation didn't allow you to do that. Well, folks, that's exactly what we're facing in education. A couple of examples. The Wicks Law. Wicks Law is something that drives up the cost of construction at school districts by about 15%. This is exclusive to New York State. No other state in the union has such a provision. In Burnt Hills, we're currently working on $13 million of projects that our voters authorize to do critical infrastructure repairs, such as replacing 50-year-old boilers, 50. We could do $2 million of extra work at no cost to the taxpayer if the Wicks Law was not applicable to school districts. Now think about it. Burnt Hills is about an average district. There's more than 700 school districts across the state. If every district could do that, that's $1.5 billion of additional work that can be done to fix our schools at no cost to the taxpayer. That's work that's going to make our schools safer for our children. It's work that's going to improve the education delivery for our students. And it's work that's going to create jobs. Another one I'd like to talk to you today is about the Triborough Amendment. The Triborough Amendment is a subset of this thing called the Taylor Law. And effectively, it's another New York State exclusive. We're the only state in the union that has it. And it means that if you have a teacher's contract and it expires, that the raises keep going until you can negotiate a new contract. Now, you can probably see right up front how this might be difficult for negotiations because one side of the bargaining party has a little bit of an unfair advantage in that situation. Currently, I consider this a Triborough tax because effectively it's costing us extra money. The Triborough tax is costing the taxpayers of Burnt Hills $550,000 a year. The New York State School Board Association recently looked at all the teacher contracts across the state, and collectively, this Triborough tax is costing us $93.5 million a year. We have to fix that. We're the only state in the union that has that, and there's no reason why we're doing that.
The governor dictates how the municipality is going to spend their money. They say, you will do this. And when they say, how are we going to pay for it, they throw their hands up and say, that's up to you. Well, the only alternative that they've had is to raise your property taxes. That's why we have the highest property taxes in the nation. That's why people like Kathy Marchione, Patty Southworth struggle to keep their counties running, because we put the handcuffs on them with a tax cap. Now, I believe the tax cap was the right thing to do, but I also believe it needed to go hand in hand with mandate relief. And I sponsored legislation to do just that 2 years ago when I first got to Albany. And I was told, no, 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 tax cap first and then mandate relief. Well, here we are close to 2 years later and virtually nothing's been done. Just a pittance of what we need to do. The governor, when he first came into office, had a 32-member task force commission. For 1 year they met, sporadically, but they met. And they came up with, at the end of the year, somewhere between Christmas and New Year's, where nobody's paying attention, they released their report. And there's virtually nothing in it. It sure as heck hasn't affected your lives one bit, because there was only a pittance of tax mandate relief in there. So they release it. The people that were on the commission didn't even know that the report was going to be released. Now, I can tell you this building and this building don't do anything without a press release unless they're not proud of it. So they released this report. The members of the commission didn't even know it was on it. Nothing got done. Then in the state of the state, we've now cut that 32-member task force down to an 11-member. That commission became a task force, so 32 members to 11. So maybe next year we'll have a squad of 4 or 5, and then maybe a SAR the year after that, and then we'll get something done. The way this building is, I can tell you, being a fairly new guy here, what this building responds to is noise. You have got to make your voices heard. This is a groundswell that is going to continue to grow and grow, because unfunded mandates are choking the life out of the greatest state in the country. And it needs to stop now. And you people are the ones that are going to get it done.